Kayla Kate here, and today we are talking about all things millennials. So often born between 1979 and 1995, roughly, they are often referred to as the I am my recognition generation, and pretty self-explanatory, says it all right there. But here we start to see the pendulum shift from the boomers who were live to work, Gen X, who had a more work-life balance, and now millennials, who are more work to live, work for the experience, work for the weekend. You start to see that dynamic play out. And again, as we remember, every generation influenced by their parents, the politics, and the pop culture. So when we narrow in on the parents of this generation, and again, we're given a general kind of stereotype of this generation, we start to see interesting dynamics played out within the parents. So often these are praise-based households, largely parented by nurturers. And this is where we start to see the helicopter parent come in. And so you have kids that have this understanding that honestly the world kind of revolves around them. They're focused, the parents are more focused on the child than maybe the good of the school or the good of the parent or the teen, where previous generations, the teacher was always right. Now the child is always right. And so when you have that kind of mentality growing up, it's no wonder that we have a generation who's often known as entitled. And again, we know not every millennial is like that. But as we see, and as people have experienced that entitlement generation, this is where we start to see it. It's because they've grown up in a system in kind of formative years where the world has revolved around them. And interestingly, there's even a millennial who gave this story. He said, I grew up in this time when I felt like the world did revolve around me. I felt special all the time when I went to school, when I came home. And he said he graduated from college and it was like his world shattered because he realized the world didn't revolve around him. And so it's an interesting dynamic, again, recognizing the influence of parents and what you're instilling in your kids. But then, of course, we move to politics. And so we have critical, kind of very significant events. We have the bombing of the World Trade Center. We have the just world threat of terrorism. We have the Columbine shooting. So before, when war was kind of out there somewhere else on somebody else's turf, all of a sudden now war is on the front door, your front steps, it can feel like. And so the question of, how those kids, how millennials view safety, how they view their kind of place in the world, and obviously war and terror and what that looks like and who's a threat and all those kind of things. As well, though, within politics, you start to see more happenings of same-sex marriage, the first African-American president. So all of these very kind of pivotal events start to happen in politics that you, again, want to go back and see how it shaped your view of government, of safety in America and all those kind of critical things. And then, of course, you have pop culture. So it makes sense because now, both personally and professionally, we can't live without technology. Internet is everywhere. Social media is a really big thing. YouTube is starting in this generation to become a really big deal. And so it was said in these generations, more and more time was being spent on the internet, on social media. And so before, where you probably had not a big influence in pop culture, it was more on parents, it was more in those kind of formative relational structures. Now, the biggest influence are potentially, depending on how many hours they spent on social media, it may be people that are influencing them, rappers or big TV influencers, or reality TV shows started to become very big. And so all of these things become, really influential. And so you start to see things like depression, self-esteem issues, motivation, because of the correlation with, how much time they're spending on social media and all things kind of pop culture enter their world in a whole new way. And then, of course, you start to see moving into Generation Z, more and more of this becoming really prevalent, and there's a whole bunch of good studies and research out there that emphasizes this. But that's kind of a snapshot on all things millennials. Obviously, there's a whole lot more out there we could get to, but it kind of gives you a framework for where some of those mentalities and stereotypes come into play, and just some really good things to think about. So as always, message me any thoughts, feedback, and we will see you soon.